Sumerian culture and mythology is full of stories of mysterious higher entities that, bestowed wisdom and fantastic ideas and concepts. And, you have to wonder, is this just down to myth, or was somebody coming down and really trying to give us a push, if you like?
Long before laboratories, satellites, or peer-reviewed journals, stories about our origins were carved into wet clay and left to dry beneath the sun of Mesopotamia. Along the fertile banks of the Tigris Euphrates, an ancient civilization recorded something extraordinary, not a metaphorical tale of spiritual awakening, but a detailed account of humanity's creation. These 6,000-year-old Sumerian texts describe gods who fashioned humans intentionally, assigning them purpose, labor, and limits. They speak of beings who grew weary of their own work and decided to engineer a new species to carry the burden. The language, though wrapped in myth, is strikingly procedural, feeling less like mystical poetry and more like documentation of an experiment. For generations, scholars categorized these writings as symbolic theology, reflections of early imagination. But what unsettles researchers today is not simply what the tablets claim, it's how they claim it. The specificity, the structure, the implication that humanity was designed rather than born of slow, blind evolution. Science has long separated myth from measurable fact, yet these ancient records still terrify scientists. Join us as we reveal why. The story does not begin with a mysterious revelation, but with dust, shovels, and patient scholarship. In the mid-19th century, European and Ottoman-backed expeditions began excavating the ancient mounds scattered across modern-day Iraq. Beneath centuries of wind-blown sediment lie the ruins of some of humanity's earliest cities, including Uruk, Nippur, and Nineveh. What archaeologists uncovered there would fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of its own intellectual history. There, they found tens of thousands of clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped markings known as cuneiform. At first, the markings were undecipherable. The breakthrough came through the work of scholars such as Henry Rawlinson, who helped decode the Behistun inscription, a multilingual royal text that functioned much like a linguistic key. By comparing Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian inscriptions, Rawlinson and others unlocked the phonetic and grammatical structure of cuneiform. What followed was not the discovery of alien secrets or hidden prophecies, but something arguably more profound in the form of the oldest written literature known to humanity. These tablets date back to the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BCE. Some were administrative records, like grain inventories, trade tallies, and tax documentation. Others were hymns, royal inscriptions, legal codes, and mythological narratives. The sea civilization, responsible for many of the earliest texts, is now known as the Sumerians, who flourished in southern Mesopotamia around 3500 and 2000 BCE. One of the most important terms learned was that Sumerian texts often refer not only to writings in the Sumerian language, but also to later Akkadian and Babylonian compositions that preserved and adapted earlier traditions. Establishing the age and authenticity of these tablets relies on standard archaeological methodology. Stratigraphy, which is the study of soil layers, allows researchers to date artifacts relative to surrounding materials. Radiocarbon dating of organic remains found in the same strata provides additional chronological anchors. Linguistic evolution within the texts themselves also helps scholars determine approximate periods of composition. This layered verification process grounds the tablets firmly within the known historical timeline of ancient Mesopotamia. Among the recovered materials were cosmological narratives that describe the origins of the world and humanity. However, it is essential to clarify that these are actually religious literature embedded within temple culture. Cities like Uruk and Nippur were not only political centers but also sacred hubs dedicated to patron deities. Temples functioned as economic engines, employing laborers, craftsmen, scribes, and priests. Within this framework, myths were not mere speculative science, but theological explanations of how order emerged from chaos and why human society existed in service to the divine. One of the most significant bodies of material was discovered in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. Though Assyrian in origin, Many of these tablets preserved far older Mesopotamian traditions. Among them were flood narratives, divine genealogies, and creation accounts that scholars later identified as part of broader literary traditions. What is striking, and sometimes misunderstood, is the procedural tone found in certain passages. Some creation stories describe gods debating, planning, and assigning roles before forming humanity from clay mixed with the essence of a slain deity. To modern readers, the language can sound structured, almost administrative. But in context, this reflects the bureaucratic culture of Mesopotamian temple society, where order, hierarchy, and labor organization defined daily life. The ancient scribes were not attempting to document biological processes, they were articulating a worldview. Humanity's creation in these texts explains why people must work, why they must worship, and why suffering exists. The myths justify social structure and ritual obligation. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Assyriology had become a formal academic discipline. Universities began systematically cataloguing and translating tablets. Over time, the sensationalism that initially surrounded the discoveries gave way to careful philology and contextual study. Scholars learned to distinguish between Sumerian originals and later Akkadian reinterpretations, between poetic metaphor and literal description. The result is a clearer, evidence-based understanding of the Sumerian and broader Mesopotamian texts that represent humanity's earliest surviving attempts to answer existential questions. They do not provide scientific accounts of genetic engineering or extraterrestrial intervention. They provide insight into how one of the world's first urban civilizations understood its place in the cosmos. With the tablets deciphered and dated, the next step is understanding what they actually say. The Sumerian creation accounts in context. The creation narratives associated with ancient Mesopotamia do not come from a single unified Sumerian book, but from a collection of texts written over centuries in Sumerian and Akkadian. Together, they form a theological tradition rather than a single, fixed doctrine. One of the most important sources is the Akkadian epic known as Atraasis, composed around the 18th century BCE, though based on earlier Sumerian material. The text opens not with the creation of humanity, but with a labor crisis among the gods. The lesser deities, tasked with digging canals and maintaining the cosmos, rebel against their burdens. In response, the higher gods decide to create humans to assume this labor. The god Enki, known in Akkadian as Ea, proposes a solution reliant on fashioning humanity from clay mixed with the flesh and blood of a sacrificed deity. Humans are thus created to relieve the gods of work. Another key text is the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, likely composed in the late 2nd millennium BCE. While it is primarily concerned with the rise of the god Marduk to supremacy, it also includes the formation of humanity. After defeating the primordial chaos deity Tiamat, Marduk creates humans from the blood of Kingu, Tiamat's ally, again assigning them the task of serving the gods. Although these texts were written in Akkadian, they preserve older Sumerian theological concepts. Earlier Sumerian compositions and temple hymns describe deities such as Enki and Enlil, playing central roles in establishing order. Enki is frequently associated with wisdom, craftsmanship, and the shaping of humanity. Enlil, often portrayed as authoritative and at times severe, represents divine governance and cosmic order. In these narratives, the act of creation is not framed as biological experimentation, it is theological craftsmanship. The use of clay is especially significant. In Mesopotamian culture, humans literally shaped clay into bricks, vessels, and tablets. To describe humanity as molded from clay was to situate humans within the same material reality as their cities and temples. It emphasized dependence, fragility, and formed purpose. The mixing of divine essence with clay has sometimes been misinterpreted in modern popular culture as a primitive description of genetic engineering. However, within its historical context, the symbolism is religious rather than technical. Blood in Mesopotamian thought represented life force. Incorporating divine blood into humanity explains why humans possess consciousness, intelligence, and a capacity for ritual. It is a theological explanation for why humans can communicate with the gods and perform sacred duties. It is also important to recognize that these texts reflect a temple-centered society. Cities such as Uruk and Nippur revolved around massive temple complexes dedicated to patron deities. These institutions controlled agriculture, labor distribution, and trade. Within this framework, saying that humans were created to serve the gods was not abstract theology. It mirrored a real economic reality. Temple laborers cultivated fields, maintained irrigation systems, and provided offerings. Myth reinforced social structure. The creation accounts also address suffering and mortality. In Atraasis, humans initially multiply rapidly, creating noise that disturbs the gods. Enlil responds with plagues and drought, culminating in a flood. Afterwards, measures are introduced to limit human population growth. These passages function as theological attempts to explain hardship, disease, and natural disaster. Rather than presenting a scientific account of demographic control, they situate misfortune within divine governance. Also, there is no single, standardized Sumerian creation story. Variations exist across time and region. Some texts emphasize divine conflict, others focus on craftsmanship or decree. This diversity reflects a living religious tradition that evolved across centuries. The idea that humanity was created to work for the gods remains consistent, but the narrative framing differs. Modern scholars approach these texts through philology, comparative mythology, and historical anthropology. They compare language patterns, trace textual borrowing, and situate each composition within its political context. For example, Enuma Elish elevates Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, reflecting Babylon's political rise. Theology and state power are intertwined. When read carefully and in context, these creation narratives reveal how ancient Mesopotamians understood hierarchy, obligation, and cosmic order. They do not describe advanced technology or extraterrestrial beings. They describe a divine society modeled after human urban life. The gods hold councils, make decisions, enforce discipline, and require labor much like kings and temple administrators. The enduring fascination with these accounts often stems from reading them through modern assumptions. Phrases about mixing blood or fashioning mankind can sound technical to contemporary ears, accustomed to scientific vocabulary, but ancient audiences would have understood them symbolically and ritually. What makes these texts historically valuable is not that they offer hidden biological insights, it is that they preserve humanity's earliest extended reflections on purpose and responsibility. They show a civilization wrestling with fundamental questions. Why must we work? Why do we suffer? Why are we mortal? The answer, in their worldview, was relational. Humans exist within a cosmic hierarchy, dependent on divine order. Understanding this context is essential before moving forward. Without it, the narratives can easily be detached from their historical setting and reshaped into something they were never intended to be. With it, they become powerful evidence of early theological imagination, grounded in the material realities of one of the world's first urban civilizations. How modern science understands human origins. While Mesopotamian creation narratives explain humanity's origins through divine intention and theological order, modern science approaches the same question through fossil evidence, genetics, and comparative biology. The contrast between these frameworks is not a conflict of data, but a difference in method and purpose. The scientific consensus places the emergence of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. Fossil discoveries at sites such as Jebel Irhoud have pushed the confirmed age of early Homo sapiens further back than previously believed. Skeletal remains show a gradual development of traits associated with modern humans, including cranial shape and facial structure. These findings are supported by stratigraphic dating and advanced radiometric techniques. Genetic research reinforces this timeline. Studies of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome variation indicate that all living humans share a common African ancestry. Population genetics reveals branching migration patterns out of Africa roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, followed by interbreeding with other hominin groups such as Neanderthals. These conclusions are drawn from measurable DNA comparisons, not textual interpretation. Cultural development also appears gradual in the archaeological record. Early symbolic artifacts like engraved ochre, shell beads, and cave paintings suggest increasing cognitive complexity over tens of thousands of years. Sites like Blombos Cave provide evidence of early symbolic behavior long before the rise of Mesopotamian civilization. Agriculture, urbanization, and writing emerged much later, beginning around 10,000 to 5,000 BCE in multiple regions independently. From a scientific standpoint, there is no evidence of sudden biological engineering or abrupt external intervention 6,000 years ago. By the time Sumerian civilization flourished, humans had already been anatomically and behaviorally modern for hundreds of thousands of years. What changed in Mesopotamia was not biology, but social complexity. So why do ancient creation stories sometimes feel as though they describe deliberate design? Cognitive scientists and anthropologists suggest that humans are natural pattern seekers. We are predisposed to infer agency behind events, a trait that likely evolved because it improved survival. When early societies sought to explain the origin of life, consciousness, and order, intentional creation by powerful beings provided a coherent narrative. Creation myths across cultures often share common features: divine craftsmanship, cosmic conflict, the use of earthly materials, and an explanation for labor or mortality. These parallels do not indicate shared historical memory of a technological event. Instead, they reflect universal human concerns. Every early agricultural society had to explain why people toil in fields, why floods occur, and why death is unavoidable. It is also important to distinguish between metaphorical language and literal description. Scientific terminology did not exist in the 3rd millennium BCE. Words translated as blood, clay, or breath carried symbolic meaning rooted in lived experience. Clay was everywhere in Mesopotamia and used for bricks, pottery, and writing tablets. Blood represented vitality. Breath symbolized life. These were theological, not biochemical, categories. Modern evolutionary theory is supported by converging lines of evidence: fossil continuity, genetic inheritance, embryological development, and observable natural selection. Unlike myth, scientific models are tested, revised, and sometimes overturned when new evidence emerges. The theory of evolution has been refined for over 150 years since Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, incorporating advances in genetics and molecular biology. That does not mean ancient texts are irrelevant. On the contrary, they are invaluable for understanding how early civilizations conceptualized existence. But their authority lies in cultural history, not in biological data. The perceived tension between Sumerian creation narratives and modern science often arises when texts are removed from context and read as proto-scientific documentation. When interpreted within their historical framework, they do not compete with evolutionary biology. They answer different questions. Science asks how humans developed biologically, while ancient myth asks why humans exist and what their role is. These are not interchangeable inquiries. In fact, the existence of creation myths tells us something scientifically meaningful about human cognition: the ability to generate structured cosmologies, to project moral order onto the universe, and to encode social structure within narrative reflects advanced symbolic thought. The Sumerian texts demonstrate not an alternative biology, but the sophistication of early urban intellect. What sometimes unsettles modern audiences is not that science is contradicted, but that ancient people articulated existential frameworks with striking confidence. They were certain of humanity's purpose within a cosmic hierarchy. Modern science, by contrast, describes processes without assigning inherent meaning. In that sense, the contrast is philosophical rather than empirical. Evolutionary biology explains how complexity arises through natural mechanisms. Mesopotamian myth explains why complexity matters within a moral universe. Understanding this distinction is essential before considering why these ancient accounts continue to captivate popular imagination. The power of the Sumerian texts lies not in hidden technological secrets, but in their enduring ability to frame humanity's place in the cosmos, which is a question science and myth approach from different directions. In the 20th century, ancient Mesopotamian texts re-entered public consciousness through popular reinterpretations. One of the most influential figures in this movement was Zecharia Sitchin, who argued that Mesopotamian deities were extraterrestrial beings and that humanity was genetically engineered as a labor force. His books reached wide audiences, particularly during the late Cold War era, when space exploration and rapid technological advancement reshaped public imagination. However, mainstream Assyriologists have consistently rejected these claims. Specialists in Sumerian and Akkadian languages point out that Sitchin's translations diverge significantly from accepted philological standards. The original texts do not describe advanced machinery, spacecraft, or biological engineering in any literal sense. Instead, they use symbolic religious language consistent with other ancient Near Eastern traditions. So why do engineered creation interpretations resonate so strongly? Part of the answer lies in timing. The 20th and 21st centuries have witnessed dramatic advances in genetics, artificial intelligence, and space exploration. Concepts such as DNA manipulation, cloning, and planetary travel are no longer purely speculative. When modern readers encounter ancient phrases about mixing blood or fashioning humans, it can be tempting to project contemporary scientific concepts backwards onto ancient metaphors. There is also a broader cultural shift toward questioning institutions, including religious and scientific authority. Alternative historical narratives often gain traction in periods of uncertainty. They offer dramatic explanations that feel revelatory, suggesting hidden knowledge suppressed or overlooked by experts. The idea that ancient civilizations possessed advanced insights taps into this desire for rediscovery. At the same time, the emotional power of the original texts should not be underestimated. In Atraasis, humanity is nearly destroyed by a flood due to divine displeasure. This resonates with modern anxieties about climate change and ecological instability. The themes feel contemporary, even though the language is ancient. It is also worth noting that ancient Near Eastern mythology influenced later traditions. Flood narratives in Mesopotamian texts predate similar accounts in the Hebrew Bible. Recognizing these shared motifs can challenge assumptions about originality and authority in religious history. For some readers, this realization is unsettling. For others, it deepens appreciation for the interconnected development of human storytelling. Academically, there is little debate about the biological origins of humanity. The evidence for human evolution is extensive and multidisciplinary. What remains debated, and rightly so, is how early societies conceptualized identity, agency, and moral order. The Sumerian texts are central to that discussion because they represent some of the earliest surviving written reflections on these themes. The enduring appeal of engineered humanity narratives may also stem from existential discomfort. Evolutionary biology presents a world shaped by natural processes without inherent purpose. Ancient creation myths, by contrast, assert intention. Humans exist because they were meant to exist. Even if that purpose involves labor and subordination, it is still the purpose. 6,000 years later, the clay impressions left by Sumerian scribes continue to provoke questions, not because they overturn science, but because they remind us that the search for origin is inseparable from the search for meaning. What are your thoughts on the existence of the texts? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.